Today I will be reading the most intriguing chapter of a book, the Gutenberg Elegies, a book that should be read by anyone who loves reading, who loves books, who loves this physical analog culture of reading books, who also is interested in new ways in which books and literature persists and lives in our today's world. This book was written in 90s, and yet many of its chapters, many of its points, many of its ideas are so original that they are quite inspiring, quite fresh, even now in 2025. This book outlived the birth of AI, social media, and I want to read you a chapter that I think is one of most thought-provoking. From the window of a train. I was traveling by train from Boston to New York. I make the trip several times a year, and I found the 5-hour run to be ideal for certain kinds of brooding and note-taking. I have never yet stepped out of Penn Station without a few pages of jumpy script packed away in my bag. On this occasion, I had the beginnings of something in mind. I was going to try to work up a set of thoughts about a passage in Oscar Wilde's essay, The Decay of Lying, the passage where his estate Vivian insists life imitates art far more than art imitates life. As we heard the zone toward Providence, I tried to ease myself into the proper state of mediative focus, a receptive, associative casting about. But I was having no luck. Indeed, the harder I tried to get in the right place, the more abstracted I felt. All sorts of thoughts flashed through my mind, but none were the kind I was hoping for. Providence came and went, and as we began the long and exulting sweep along the Connecticut shoreline, I closed my eyes and tried to subdue my frustration. It was soon after, somewhere in the vicinity of Old Mystic, that a single phrase set up its recursive beat in my head: the reader and the writer. There was no logic to it. It stuck like one of those songs we obsess on. I mouthed it silently 100 times, unsure of its origin or destination. I knew only that it suited me to say the words. Before long, however, the packaging of sense fell away, leaving me with just two sudden trologies: reader, writer. And there I repeated it no less compulsively, aware as I did so that the other beats fell in sync with the more extended dactyls of the train. And then, without warning, a string of sentences arrived, and I hurried to record them in my notebook. But even as I wrote, I had the sense that the words were going to be thrown away. They were too ripe, too purple. But I figured that they were just the locomotive for fright that would arrive later. And so they were. As soon as I got back from New York, I sat down and copied out the instigating passage and then the thoughts that had massed just behind them. Reader, writer, reader, writer. A noise and emotion like that of a galloping rear lane, a lone propeller whispering over the meadows of history. Something made of two parts conjoined, awkward in repose, but utterly married once set into motion. Scarcely audible, certainly alongside the heavy creaking of the world's machinery, but passing along the very spirit breath itself. The lone pneumatic hiss on which all meaning rides. Reader, writer. The eerie, necessary interchange, a surge of animated air as one breathes in and the outer breathes out. The writer writes and the reader reads, or so it appears, and there the matter rests foremost. But in truth, this simple proposition is a mask for a vast system of ambiguities and entanglements. For it is also true, in a not so very far-fetched way, that in writing the writer reads, and that in reading the reader writes. The activities are by no means as clear-cut as the appearances would lead us to believe. To put it simply, writing is not merely the action of moving the pen or hitting the letters on the keyboard, any more than reading is the straightforward ingesting of print through the eyes. Underneath these basic, seemingly definitive physical operations lie other processes. What the writer does while moving the pen is not invention. The writer does not create the unknown and unforeseen, whole cloth out of nothing. Of course, we recognize that. That is the unrepeatable, paradigm act that we grant to our mystic gods alone. All subsequent acts of creation, if they can be called creation at all, are finally an arranging and interpreting of the given, not so much a bringing into being as a recovering of what is in some way already known. The writer then places himself in a condition of silent receptivity. He begins by repressing or pushing aside all impediments, tries to rid himself of extraneous stimuli. Only then, when the way is clear, do the fine air tip extensions of the inner senses begin their tracking process. The writer looks for the words that will best convey sensations and ideas. These are known to us first as inklings, energy patterns and traces of great distinctness that are inevitably bound up with memories. Anything we know is, after all, known through memory. We do not find the units of expression floating around the interior space like so many colored balloons, each tethered to its own meaning. More likely, they lie embedded in the dense layers of our print memory. But don't imagine this as a dictionary or filing system. Our print memory is probably more like some intermediate hyperspace filled with link-up standards of coded matter, except that the matter is invisible. It is all impulse. The whole of our experience is there, disassembled, in saturated bits, ready for any of the myriad new formations that produce yet another version of the past. Let us say that we are writers and that our aim is to describe a certain setting, an old wooden dock at lake, for instance. We know from some composite of our own experiences the impressions that we are after: a morning silence, the air over the lake like a transparent membrane, the springing give and take of the boards as we walk toward the end of the dock, the sensations of peeling paint and damp, furrowed wood against our bare feet, the creaking sound, and so on. To locate those images, these particular nuances, we research our sense memories, applying our attentiveness inward with the same diligence we would apply to the reading of a difficult text. And it's true, we are in some ways treating our experience as a text and setting about to work our way through it. We must, for we cannot have all the images and sensations we need at our command at once. Memory works by association, by accumulation, and by unconscious reconstruction. First, we try to recall how it was, or if we are translating experience, might have, or if we are translating experience, might have been to walk down to the lake in the early morning. We move in sequence very much as if we were following the logic of another writer's description. We see the dog from the distance, see the mist. We summon in natural order what must be the components of the experience. How cool the sand felt, how the boards first took the body's weight. We read ourselves, and then we report on that reading. We call it writing. And when we do this reporting, we activate the relevant areas of our language memory, which include not only all we know of words, but also all we know through words. The description we write will inevitably be a composite, a reworking of 100 odd descriptions that have dissolved together inside. For I don't think that we ever really forget what was read. For I think that we ever really forget what we read, any more than we forget what we experience. More likely, we break down the unity of the illusion, preserving the elements alone with the mountains of other traces until they become virtually indistinguishable, until what we have read takes on the status of being something that once happened to us. When we begin to write our description, then we find that we already have a sense of a kind of shape we want and some intuition of the pace. This is not because these are necessarily properties of reality we would render, rather because we have a very particular expectation built up from everything we read and internalized. We know just the feeling, the effect we want. In a sense, we proceed towards our expression by trying to read ourselves in the very prose we are about to write. Writing then becomes a kind of matching up of the right words to the specific word impulses that are lined up inside. This is all very Platonic, to see the act of discovery less as an inventing than it is rediscovering. In writing, we grope toward what we think of as the inevitable wording, as though the prose were already finished in an inner place we can just barely reach. And when we do succeed, when from time to time we reach it, we know we're beyond revision. This is where the subterranean influence of reading plays its part. The writers we read furnish us with expectations. They teach us how we like to see and feel and hear and think about things. So while it is true that we wrote the description of the dog, discovered it inside ourselves phrase by phrase, we will, if we are honest, share at least some part of credit with the E.B. White and Eudora Welty and Norman MacLean and Henry David Thoreau and the innumerable others whose words are packed like silt inside us. We are not done. The other side of the picture, that reading is kind of writing, is not less persuasive. Once again, we locate ourselves in the cloudy zone where language and memories flow together. The core question is, what do we do with words when we read? I would argue that we make another person's words our own, not simply by looking at them, but by apprehending, inhabiting, and reinscribing them. The dog was old and ramshackle. The peeling boards were springly underfoot. We can only take possession of the words by feeling them out with our own recollective experience. Once again, those saturated bits are set into motion, combined and recombined. The larger implications of this, bearing on our own sense of personal past, are quite staggering. It may well be that we do not carry our memories in an existing archive of stored expressions. Isn't it just as likely that we create the past fresh from available components every time we remember? Each memory would then be a story we write for ourselves on the spot. Some of these, though a kind of narrative insistence, some of these, through a kind of narrative insistence, shaped in turn by obscure needs, become the authorized versions. This is how reality was. In any case, when we read, we bring the life, ultimately our life, through the words. In tapping our experience, thus, reading becomes a steadily unfolding memory event, which is not to say that we are actively reliving our pasts every time that we read a story, but that our associative mechanisms are constantly operative. Those bits are agitated like the molecules in a pot on the verge of boiling. This is one of the great incentives and surprises of reading, that we are at all times so close to the sub-threshold energies of the self. The peeling boards were springly underfoot means nothing much until we have produced the sensations in ourselves, created them. To do so, we have to brush against the original traces, whatever it is we carry inside that holds our knowledge of springly boards. In other words, we make the music indicated by the notes, but even more than a musician following the score, we invest ourselves in the act. This investment resembles closely what the writer does in putting words on the page. Reading and writing, reader and writer. Could it be that at some level that the two activities are not all that different, that they are just manifestations of the ebb and the flow of our awareness, ways we have of breaking down and recombining the countless interlocking puzzle pieces inside? Every true reader, then, is a writer, and every true writer is a reader, and every person engaged in the project of self awareness is the reader and the writer of himself. Writer and reader, they are the recto and verso of language, which is itself the medium of our deeper awareness. This chapter argued that there is no constant distinction between a reader and writer, and that every reader is a writer, and that every writer is a reader. It explains how it is, why, and I believe that that influences the way I read, influences the way I write, and if you think about it for a minute on how you do reading and writing, you do experience those letters on a page, not through some objective reality. You are not just experiencing each letter, but you're writing it in your mind. You're creating those scenes in your mind. So you are kind of a writer who, by help of a writer who reading it on in a book, you are rendering it in your mind. And on the other hand, if you are a writer, you are influenced, you're constantly influenced by what you read, by what was written before you, by what reality presents, by those multiplicity, millions of ways in which it could be described in words. I think that this is an incredibly fresh thought, and that we could take notice of it when we are both reading and writing. And if you write, if you're a writer, copywriter, it can also change your attitude to your audience, to your readers. If you are creative and you make, for example, videos or anything else, this also can change how you think of your audience, how you think of people who read or watch, because they are not just co-creators, they are creators themselves, creating this certain book or video or film for themselves. And you are just like making guidelines. You are more of a guide through this reality that is around us that you try to prescribe. So thanks for watching this to the very end. I know that I'm reading with a certain accent. You can write a commentary whether it's annoying or it's quite natural. And I will be happy to discuss all of those ideas, all of those thoughts here. On my channel, there are a lot of talking videos on all of the topics connected to culture, to technology, to reading, to art, and it would be great if you also watched others and commented on other videos, because I genuinely love to have such kind of discussion. Thank you for being here. Goodbye.